In today's video, we're going to be going over how to replace the front brake pads without replacing the rotors on a 2010 to 2014 Subaru Outback. For today's projects, the tools needed for this job will be a power half-inch impact gun or lug wrench, half-inch drive 19mm deep well socket, half-inch drive 3-inch extension, 3/8 inch ratchet, 3/8 inch drive 14mm socket, and a 3/8 inch drive 3-inch extension. You're also going to need a dual piston caliper compressor tool or a single piston caliper compressor tool along with an 8 or 10 inch channel lock pliers or 6-inch C-clamp and a small to medium flat blade screwdriver. In addition, spray oil or anti-seize and mechanics wire caliper hanger hooks. Ideally, having the dual piston caliper compressor tool would be the perfect tool for you to use, but you may only have a single piston caliper compressor tool, or you may not have any of those, so you may have a 6-inch C-clamp and 8 or 10 inch pair of channel lock pliers. That'll help compress the two pistons in. You have to compress them both at the same time, not one at a time. The mechanics wire or the caliper hanger hooks is just to be able to hang the calipers out of the way, usually off to the strut, so that way it doesn't hang by the brake line. And the spray oil and anti-seize, that's for when you put the lug nuts back on. It's always recommended, especially for chrome lug nuts and stuff on aluminum wheels, to put a little spray oil. It could be WD-40, any type of spray oil, or an anti-seize on the threads. Not a lot, just a little bit. That way your lug nuts don't seize up onto the stud.
I always look for frame structure. As you can see, that's part of the frame right there. And then that's a bolt that holds the frame to the body. And if you'll jack it at that point or somewhere on that frame member, you won't bend the body and you won't smash anything. It's designed to handle the weight of the car, so you using the jack right there on it will not hurt it. So we're going to change out the brake pads without changing out the rotor, and the reason being is it doesn't have any kind of pulsing in the brake pedal or roughness in the steering wheel or in the car. It's all smooth, so that means the rotors have wore smooth. I always highly recommend changing the rotors when you redo brakes, but sometimes you can just change out the brake pads and get one more use out of the rotors. These rotors are made so thin from factory or OEM replacements, either one. They're made so thin that you can't turn them. Like in the old days, you could always just take them down and turn them several times, before you had to discard them and get new ones. Now they make them thin enough to where pretty much 1 to 2 brake pad usages and they're gone. So this will be its second one, so these will be gone after this last one. But just to make sure, I'm going to use a caliper. I've got its measurement, then I'll go look at the minimum specs, which I'll just post up here in a picture with what it measured and what the minimum specs are and why I'm not replacing the rotors. What I'll do is I'll give it a squeeze or a pull towards me. What I'm doing is just compressing the piston a little bit. That makes this come off easier. And I'll get a little wire and hang this so it's not hanging on the brake line. But I can tell you, people, where I've let them hang in some of these videos, people say, oh, you can't do that. Yes, you can. This line is designed to be for 12,000 psi. If the weight of this caliper, unless it's just some monster thing, is going to break it or tear it apart, then you don't need that brake line. It'll give out when you hit the brakes. But I'll run a line on it. You don't have to bleed the brakes or break the hydraulics. All you gotta do is just put a little wire on it and hang it up from the strut. A lot of these calipers are aluminum nowadays, so they don't weigh anything anyhow. And this one's dual pistons. I want to make it fun to compress both pistons at the same time, which means you want to do one side at a time. If you go and undo the other side, if you have, and I recommend this on any brake job. Anytime you do a brake job, don't take both sides apart at the same time and then compress the pistons, because you can pop the other piston out on the other side. So do one side at a time, especially when you have dual pistons like this. They have a tendency to, one can pop out before the other one, and it's a nightmare to put back together. Yeah, these brake pads were down to almost nothing now. Wasn't too far away from getting into the metal. These are the squealers, this little tab here. So what happens is it starts rubbing on the rotor. Every time you hit the brakes, it'll give you a squeal indicating that you need to be changing your brake pads out. Before ripping everything apart, compare your brake pads to the new ones. They can vary as far as like the way they're designed, because it depends on the performance, but your biggest thing is you want to look at the back sides and make sure they do actually fit or look the same shape. If the new pads don't come with this backing plate, I usually take it off so I can put it back on the other one. Now what I'll do, it depends on what type of brake tool compression you have. I mean, there are some out there made for dual pistons. In a case like this, they make a tool for dual pistons. And what I can do here, since this is made for a single piston, is get a pair of channel locks to assist that and just kind of squish it all together. You can also use carpenter clamps and catch the back side like I'm going to do with the channel locks. So you just do this together and help assist it. You don't try to force it, you just try to move it in smoothly. That's why they don't give you such a big huge knob on this thing. I mean, if you have to have a big lever to squish your pistons in, then you've got a problem. So that's the whole point, is to make sure they do go back in smoothly. That lets you know if you have any kind of sticking pistons or problems, and these are going in real smooth. Now you have the brake hardware, and it's great if your new pads come with the hardware like this one did. So I would recommend changing them. So you want to make note how they can come out, which I already did before I pulled it out, plus the fact this opening only allows you to put it on this way. You couldn't put it on that way, obviously. And you can look at the bottom and the tabs point down. These are still in good shape, but it doesn't hurt to change them. Most of the time you can just push them up there with your fingers. And if you're curious what these do, this allows the pads to be able to slide in the caliper racket smoothly. You wouldn't want them to touch the actual cast because it can hang up and get caught at an angle where more, or just stay stuck on the rotor. Okay, now whereas those pads had a squealer on both sides, the replacements don't. And it probably doesn't really matter. I always usually put the squealer to the outside. If they don't fit real tight. Just slightly bend the tabs just a little bit to get it tightened up. And these are Wagner pads. And I recommend anytime you're doing a brake job, do not get the store brand or the store brands. AutoZones and I think Advanced both have what they call wherever or something like that. And just so you know, this pad kind of pushes on these, it kind of springs it and holds it kind of tight. So you have to kind of get it in position and spring them that way. And the squealer's on the outside. But I don't, I had to squeeze the squealer up a little bit to go into that. But make sure that the pad's seated flat against the rotor. And the same when we do the other side. And then just slide the caliper over it. Know what I was saying about the AutoZone and the Advanced wherevers, and I think O'Reilly's has their house brand or whatever. Some main manufacturer makes it, but to be honest with you, I find they don't last very long. If you're going to get the house brands of any store, get the ceramic pads. They seem to be the best. They don't put out as much dust on the wheel. The insides are always tricky because you can't see what you're doing as well. But you can see that the pads are flush onto the rotor. And you can see the difference in the thickness of the pads. Here's the backing, here's the actual metal frame of the pad. Metal frame, super thin, super thin. Now since we've compressed the pistons, also make sure that your guide pins, these pins right here, make sure they still move freely. If they're stiff, you want to pull them out and use grease on them, caliper grease. Also, they have flat spots on them. They do because they sit up against a little edge, so you want to make sure they're turned correctly or they won't go in. If you're using air tools or cordless electric tool of some sort to put these on with, I always start them by fingers and make sure they thread a good ways before you put your air tools on. That way you don't strip it out and mess it up. Now, anytime you're dealing with the brakes, do not rely on your power tool, whatever you're using, to do the final tightening on these bolts. Do it by hand. And the reason being is that way you know that it's not over torqued or under torqued. after any brake job that you do, when you get it all back together and get the tires back on, pump your brake pedal a few times until you've got a good solid pedal, so you know your brakes are ready to stop the vehicle for when you go to test drive it. Anytime you throw your aluminum wheel up on the studs, you want to try to be careful, because these can just file that aluminum and pack aluminum up in the threads. And what'll happen is when you put the lug nut over a thread that's got packed in aluminum, it'll over tighten it in the threads and cause it to ream out the rest of the threads. So when you go to slide your wheel up on it, kind of be careful, get it lined up, and then once you get it pushed on, make sure the threads are clear before you put the lug nuts on. One trick is not to raise the car so high that you have to lift the wheel way up to get it. I mean, if you got the strength, go for it. But I usually try to catch it on one, and then once it is, lift it and push it on. Don't just push it on. Run your fingers over the stud just to make sure you don't have any debris on it. And then it doesn't hurt to put the little oil or anti-seize in your lug nuts, which I've already done all these. Run your lug nuts, run at least 2 of them up by hand. I know if you've got you a cordless impact or a pneumatic gun, you want to play shop and run these things up, but any good mechanic is not going to do that. They're going to run special aluminum wheels, expensive ones too. They're going to run the lug nuts up by hand and tighten them by hand. The reason being is on the back side of the wheel, it's aluminum and it goes over a steel hub usually. And a lot of shops will just throw that wheel out there real quick. So when they're doing that, they're cocking the wheel around. It can get a bite from that center hub and mar the aluminum and then make the wheel not sit on there straight. So just I will always, especially aluminum wheels, call me a perfectionist, but I'll run them up by hand. It does take longer, but it beats buying a $1,000 wheel. When you think they're tight, see if the wheel wiggles. If the wheel doesn't wiggle, then you know you've got it good and firm. Then you can use your power tool, if you have one. If not, you want to snug it up with a ratchet or something just lightly, just before you set it down to torque it. You want to do a star pattern. If it's a 5 lug, I'll put the link down in the description on lug patterns, because you may have 6 lugs, 4 lugs, 8 lugs, but if the 5 lug, you'll do a star pattern. You don't sit there and hold it until it just runs up to 200 foot-pounds. You just I know my gun pretty well. That's probably about 70-80 foot-pounds. And these torque at 90 on this particular car. So I'll run the rest up with a torque wrench and do the same thing as star pattern. Then I'll go back over it 2 more times, and you don't jerk it to make it pop, you go real slow.
So if you found this information in this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe, and always check back because I'm always working on something crazy. Also, if you have any questions, be sure to leave me a comment or go to my website, rodshop.org, and you can contact me there, show me pictures, whatever. I'm not going to spam your email if you contact me. But anyhow, we'll see you in the next one.